Many of us have heard the quote, "Comparison is the thief of all joy." And now, while this quote is dead relevant in many circumstances, comparison can also serve as a very valuable mindset. Like anything in life, it's not that easy and everything is very black and white. Most things come down to perspectives and values. And when the topic is comparison, there are a few questions that we should be asking ourselves, such as, who are we? Therefore, what types of people are we comparing ourselves to? What do we value, and what are we aiming at? It would be foolish to compare yourself to somebody who is a Nobel Prize winning scientist when you're simply just trying to be a good parent. What mindset are we comparing ourselves through? Are we being far too self-critical? Are we being too passive? Are we shaming ourselves for not being of the same equivalence and competence to somebody who is in our domain of competence? Most people have a very unhealthy relationship with comparison, but it isn't necessarily their fault. We have been conditioned to place celebrities and other special people on a make-believe pedestal. We see them in movies, we see them in TV and in magazines, and now all over the internet. The millennial and the Z generation are the ones that have this the worst because they have been born into a world of digital consumerism and social media. Let's say you're a 15-year-old girl who's been raised seeing this distorted perception of reality throughout her entire adolescent life. A flood of Instagram pictures and constant highlights making it seem that everybody has a life that is much more preferred to yours. With this new distorted reality becoming more and more normal, it leads you to think that there's something wrong with your life because it isn't perfect like everybody else's seems to be. This leads you to value what is now impossible to attain, which is a life where everything is perfect and fine. The people you compare yourself to have a perfect body, a perfect relationship, they eat delicious food at every meal, and they live a life free of stress. Now, how could you, in your young, naive mind, fail to fall into this trap of depression and anxiety when you feel like everybody's living an exceptional life except for you? Most people who need to constantly show the highlights of their life are usually actually very unfulfilled with their lives. They are unfortunately slaves to an addiction that has been intentionally developed. Likes on social media hacks our primitive desires to be liked and accepted by the tribe that we belong to. We get a small hit of dopamine knowing that people approve of what we are showing to the world. There's a falsely admired idea that is growing in popularity, which is that we don't care what people think about us. But the reality of it is that we care a lot about what other people think about us. And in fact, it was crucial to our very survival when we were living as hunter-gatherers. If members of the tribe believed us to be untrustworthy or unreliable, we would be banished from the group, which meant we would most likely die. You'd be a fool to do anything that would harm your reputation if that was the cost. Now, obviously, life is quite a bit different in 2021 as we live in houses or apartment buildings instead of in the jungle with tribes of 50 to 100 people. It's different also because we buy our food from Safeway and grocery stores instead of hunting it in the forest. We no longer rely on anybody for our own survival, and we can do it all on our own. Now, this is certainly a more comfortable and leisurely life, but we are not much different from our hunter-gatherer ancestors. We are still Homo sapiens and have the exact same primitive motivations as our ancestors from 12,000 years ago. Now, with that being said, we desperately need the social approval of other people because, again, we would die from it if we were deprived of it in the past. Which is why it's so hard to put your phone down and stop searching for dopamine hits from the social approval that you get from social media. Now, this rant was tilted a little more towards the negative side as to why we compare ourselves, but there's also a positive to it. A way where it can empower you to reach higher and believe that you're capable of more in your life. Let's do another thought experiment and say that you're a young 18-year-old man who is from a rough neighborhood. The odds are already not in your favor, and if you grew up to live a life where most people would consider it unsuccessful, that would be the expected outcome from most people. But let's say you want to better yourself. So you choose to join a martial arts academy and you begin training in jiu-jitsu, which gives you a perfect opportunity to channel your fears, doubts, and frustrations into something positive. Now along the way, you meet another young man who's a couple years older than you, but much more experienced. Say he's 25 years old and he's competed in tournaments in MMA and he's going for it in the sport. You gain inspiration by him by observing him, and you wonder how he got so far in his journey. Eventually you get to know him a little bit better and you discover that the two of you have a lot more in common than you had previously thought. All of a sudden he's quite similar to you and not much different. He's also damaged in the same ways that you are, but he chooses to do something about it. He's another imperfect person who has simply been on the path of bettering himself a little bit longer than you have. He's somebody that you can learn a great deal of things from, and he has done the things that you would hope to one day achieve as well. Because of all this, you choose to compare yourself to him because he's experienced similar things as you, and he doesn't allow his past to define him. Now with all this in mind, you begin to understand that you're capable of a lot more than you had previously thought. You begin to understand that you can choose to make something of yourself through taking responsibility for yourself. And when you compare yourself to somebody that you admire and respect, it acts as a motivating force. It's something that lifts you up and pulls you upwards towards the ideal version of yourself. It can be a positive source of motivation because you know that you can achieve great things because these people have suffered in the same way that you have. You realize that you're not alone in this world, and that everybody who has achieved anything in their life did so through overcoming obstacles, resistance, and persistence. Overcoming the resistance that we all feel, the resistance that will always be a factor, the resistance that you must choose to face every day on the road to discovering who you are and who you could be.